My name is Deandra, and I'm a youth reach counselor with JVS Toronto, and I work with youth who have been in conflict with the law or at risk of being in conflict with the law. The first thing that we would encourage youth to do is to Google themselves. A youth that has been in conflict with the law may have been in a part of a high-profile case. There may have been news reports on the incident that happened, that occurred in the past, and so there may be some negative media around that person. If there are things that exist online that create a negative image around them, and it's the first few hits when you Google their name, what we do is we have them recreate their image to reflect who they are now, and we do this by creating social media pages. With regards to addressing a gap on your resume or on a youth's resume, gaps that are a year and under a year do not necessarily raise a flag because employers recognize that it takes a while to find a job. Now, if you're working with a youth who has more than a year missing because whether they were incarcerated or they just weren't working, they were away from the labor force, there are a couple ways that you can strategically address this question if asked in an interview. The idea is to focus on what they did actively and not so much what they did not do. So in that period of time when the youth wasn't working, were they taking care of family? Were they traveling? Were they volunteering? Were they learning a skill? Anything other than the fact that they weren't working is something that they can focus on, talk about it, talk about what they've learned during that time, and then move on from the point.
I think one of the first things is understanding what their record is. If you have that relationship, it's very good to just communicate with them and find out, okay, what is their record? And then from there, you can find out kind of what limitations they have. One of the other good things is to get them to do a police background check. They might think they have this like real serious record, so on and so on, but really when the police background check comes back, they really have something very, very minor that won't stop them from going to any employment, any work employment. So that's where I would start with them. And then from there, it's about creating connections with employers who are gonna hire with a criminal record. So you look into construction companies, there's some marketing firms, there's tons of things out there that these youth can work at. And they think that those possibilities aren't there, that their only possibility is like factory work or construction work. And that's really not the case. So it's about creating relationships with employers and being upfront with them about what the record that the youth has and seeing if that's a possibility. If it is a possibility, then you guys can go through that avenue. One of the worst things to do is to send a youth to apply for a job and they get through the whole process and then they do their police background check and then they find out that something pops up and then they can't work at that establishment. Right then and there, it just deters them. I'm not saying it's going to bring them into their past life if that's what they were into, but it'll definitely deter them from applying for jobs and going through that process. So try to work that out before you get to that piece.
My name is Alan DePass. I'm a pre-employment facilitator with the John Howard Society of Toronto, where I work with men who have been in some sort of conflict with the criminal justice system and are looking for assistance getting back into employment. There are three types of background checks that an employer can conduct on an applicant. The first is a criminal record check. Under a criminal record check, an employer can see convictions that have not been subject to a pardon, except in the case that it was a summary conviction and has been more than 5 years since the offense, the employer can no longer see this information. The next level of record check is called a police record and judicial matters check. This shows everything on the first level of check. It also shows any other findings of guilt. So an absolute discharge, a conditional discharge, or a suspended sentence. And the third type of check, which is not quite as common as the other two, is called a vulnerable sector screening and is only done in the event that the person applying for the position is going to be working with a vulnerable population, such as children and adults. As outlined by the Occupational Health and Safety Act, employers are not required to do a criminal background check on their employees except in specific circumstances. But an employer does have the right to request a criminal background check. In the event that an employer requests a criminal background check as a condition of hiring, consent must be given by the applicant. An employer is not allowed to just do a background check without consent. Once the criminal background check is done, depending on the type of check, it depends on where that record will go. So for a police record check, the check should go back to the applicant and the applicant will submit that record to the employer. However, the applicant is allowed to sign consent for their record to be sent directly to the employer for review. When it comes to a vulnerable sector screening, that check has to go back to the applicant and the applicant must submit that in person to the employer. The employer is not allowed to receive that check directly.